It was the summer of 1971. The children of Times Beach ran barefoot through the streets, chasing a truck that sprayed oil to keep the dust down. They did not know they were dancing on their own death sentence. The sun hung heavy over Missouri. The houses seemed to sleep beneath a blanket of heat. Open windows let in the smell of the Meramec River, the distant song of insects and the sound of bicycles rattling over loose stones. Times Beach was a small town, one of those places where everyone knew everyone's name, where mothers called their children from the porches, where neighbors waved from across the road, where summer felt endless. But there was one everyday enemy: dust. Dust rose with every car. It slipped into homes, it covered curtains, it clung to skin, it filled throats. On dry days, the whole town seemed to breathe dirt. Then the truck appeared, slow, heavy, spraying oil across the roads as if it were blessing the earth. The children followed it, laughing. Some jumped onto the freshly darkened road, others left footprints with their bare feet. To them, that black liquid was just part of some strange, shiny, almost fun. But the air changed. After the truck passed, a sharp chemical smell remained. Sour, dense, invisible. A smell that did not belong to the earth or the river or childhood. The adults said it was normal. They said it was used oil. They said it helped keep the dust down. They said the streets would finally be clean. They called it a solution. They called it savings. They called it progress, but Times Beach was not being protected. It was being poisoned. That magic oil that promised to clean the town would end up devouring it from beneath, soaking into the soil, clinging to tires, entering homes, hiding in lungs, and for years no one could see the monster. Because the monster had no face. It made no sound. It did not knock on the door. It only waited. Welcome to Echoes of Shadows. If you are drawn to stories where reality surpasses the worst nightmare, subscribe now and turn on the bell. Like this video if you believe there are secrets that should never come to light, and tell us in the comments. Do you fully trust what the government says is safe? Because tonight, we are entering a town that was erased from the map. A town where danger did not arrive with fire or explosions. It arrived in silence. It arrived in a truck. It arrived as a cheap remedy for dust. And when Times Beach understood what had happened, it was already too late. A town built on calm. Before it became a warning, Times Beach was a refuge. It grew beside the old Route 66, that legendary road that promised movement, rest, and a future for many. Times Beach was a simple place. It was not a great city. It had no skyscrapers, no glowing avenues. It had modest houses, open yards, dogs sleeping in the sun, and children playing near the river. The Meramec was part of its identity, a wide, patient river capable of giving beauty and fear in equal measure. In summer, the town smelled of hot grass, damp wood, still water, gasoline, and dust. So much dust. The unpaved roads were a constant problem. Every car raised a cloud that stung the eyes. Every truck left behind a brown curtain on dry days. It felt as if the entire town was inhaling earth. The solution seemed simple: spray oil on the streets, a common practice, cheap, fast, apparently harmless. And in a town with limited resources, cheap can sound like salvation. But sometimes, negligence disguises itself as help. Sometimes, poison arrives speaking the language of efficiency, and sometimes, no one asks where the substance being spread across the ground where children play actually came from. The mistake of Russell Bliss. The man who brought that oil to Times Beach was named Russell Bliss. He was not a scientist. He was not a government official. He was not an environmental health expert. He was a man with trucks, a man offering a service, a man who, to save money, accepted industrial chemical waste and mixed it with used oil. Inside that waste was dioxin. Dioxin. A cold word, a clinical word, a word that seems small until you understand its weight. Dioxin was tied to the production of chemicals used in Agent Orange, a persistent, invisible substance capable of remaining in the environment for years. It does not need to announce itself. It does not need to stain the water red or cover the sky with smoke. It simply stays in the soil, in the dust and fat and bodies and generations. Bliss mixed that waste with oil and sprayed it over roads, properties, stables, and streets. For him, it was work. For Times Beach, it was a sentence. The first to understand that something was wrong were not the officials. They were the animals. In places where that oil had been sprayed, birds began falling dead from the trees. Horses that once ran strong started to grow sick. Their bodies broke out in sores. Some grew thin without explanation. Some bled. Some died in their stalls, surrounded by the same dust someone had promised to control. Dogs became ill. Chickens stopped behaving normally. Silence began spreading among the animals like a warning no one wanted to read, and meanwhile the roads kept shining under the sun. That dark shine looked like the oily face of a lie. The silent poison. Dioxin could not be seen. That was the horror. There was no green cloud over the town, no crater, no alarm ringing in the square. Life continued. Children went to school, mothers hung laundry, fathers washed cars, families gathered for dinner, and beneath that routine, the silent poison clung to everything. To the soles of shoes, to tires, to toys that fell onto the road, to small hands that touched the dirt and then touched bread, faces, mouths. Imagine a threat you cannot see, a suffocation without smoke. An entire town walking over a substance it did not understand, breathing particles it could not name, trusting that if no one shouted danger, then there was no danger. But the danger was already there. Times Beach simply did not yet have the words to name it. And when a community cannot name its own threat, it becomes completely defenseless. The warnings no one heard. As time passed, the doubts began to pile up. Why were the animals getting sick? Why did certain properties seem marked by death? Why did that oil smell so strange? Why did the remedy for dust seem to leave behind something heavier than dust itself? Answers came late, or they did not come at all. Negligence has many forms. Sometimes it is a signature on a document. Sometimes it is a call no one answers. Sometimes it is a report placed in a drawer. Sometimes it is a person looking away because admitting the truth costs too much. Meanwhile, Times Beach kept living on top of an open wound, a wound covered by dry earth, a wound waiting for rain, the fatal flood. 1982. December arrived with cold air. Homes lit their Christmas lights. Children thought about presents. Families decorated trees, wrapped gifts, prepared dinners. But the Meramec River began to rise. At first, it was a familiar concern. Towns beside water learned to read the level of a river the way one studies the face of an unpredictable animal. But this time, the water did not stop. It rose. It advanced. It swallowed the roads, it entered yards, it surrounded houses, then it crossed the doors. The flood arrived like a dark hand spreading over Times Beach. The brown water dragged branches, mud, trash, memories, and fear. But it also carried something else. Something invisible. Something that had been waiting in the streets for years. Dioxin. The poison that had clung to the ground was lifted by the water and spread into every corner of the town. It entered living rooms, carpets, beds, kitchens, closets, children's toys. A wet teddy bear was no longer just a wet teddy bear. A soaked blanket was no longer just a blanket. A photo album covered in mud was no longer just a damaged memory. Everything could be contaminated. Everything could be dangerous. The flood did not wash Times Beach clean, it turned it into a chemical exposure scene. When the water receded, the town did not return to what it had been. The smell remained. The mud remained. The marks on the walls remained, showing how high the river had climbed, and one question froze the blood. What had the water left inside the homes? Christmas Eve. Then came the moment that would split the history of Times Beach forever. It was Christmas Eve. While the country prepared to celebrate, while many families hung ornaments and waited for a night of peace, peace shattered in Times Beach. Men in white chemical protection suits entered the town. Figures covered from head to toe, faceless. No visible skin. No recognizable humanity. They walked between houses decorated with Christmas lights as if they were entering a war zone. But the war had already happened, and the town had lost without knowing it. Imagine opening your front door and seeing a man dressed to protect himself from the place where you sleep. Imagine that figure telling you your home is no longer safe, that the living room where you celebrated birthdays may be contaminated, that the kitchen where you prepared food for your children may hold poison, that the yard where they ran barefoot may have been a trap for years. Imagine hearing that you have to leave, not for one cautious night, not until the storm passes, not until the mud dries. You have to leave and never return. Times Beach became a forbidden town in a matter of hours. Neighbors began looking at one another with the same question in their eyes. What does a person take when they are told everything they own might be contaminated? Clothes, toys, photographs, the crib, the family Bible, the wedding dress stored in a box, grandmother's dishes. What part of a life can be saved when the poison cannot be seen? Some families packed in a hurry. Others stood frozen, unable to understand. Some children did not know why they could not return to their rooms, why their toys had to stay behind, why the adults spoke in low voices, why everyone looked at the house as if it had already become a ghost. The Christmas lights were still on, but they no longer illuminated a home. They illuminated a goodbye, the erased town. Then came the abandonment, empty streets, dark windows, motionless swings, houses without voices. Times Beach began to look like a photograph frozen in the moment after a tragedy. Life had left, but its shapes remained. Tables, Porsches, curtains, growth marks on walls where mother had measured her children's height. Everything remained in place, but nothing belonged to anyone anymore. Because a contaminated town stops being a town, it becomes a warning. Officials spoke of risk, of levels, of studies, of testing, of contamination. But for the families, the word was different. Loss. They lost homes, they lost belongings, they lost streets where they had learned to walk. They lost cemeteries of memory, they lost trust, because when an authority says something is safe and later arrives in white suits to order an evacuation, something breaks forever. Not only a community, faith and protection itself. The cleanup. Years later, The town was bought out, closed, and subjected to a massive cleanup. The houses were demolished. The structures were removed. The contaminated soil was treated. What once had names, addresses, and families became decontamination material. An entire town was reduced to controlled debris. The place where there had been yards became a restricted zone. The place where there had been laughter became a file. The place where there had been childhood became an environmental case. And there is something deeply sad about imagining a town being taken apart piece by piece. Not destroyed by a visible enemy, not erased by a bomb, but dismantled by guilt, by negligence, by a chain of human decisions that should never have happened. Every demolished house was a confession. Every empty street was evidence. Every truck carrying contaminated soil seemed to carry away another piece of Missouri's memory. The echo today. Times Beach no longer exists as a town. Its name remains, but not as it once did. Not as a place to live. Not as a community, not as a home. What remained was transformed into Route 66 State Park. A state park. Green. Quiet. Almost beautiful. There are trails. There are trees. There are visitors who walk without knowing that beneath their feet sleeps a story of suffocation, abandonment, and silent poison. Grass grew over the wound. Nature returned to cover the place, but covering something does not always mean healing it. Sometimes the landscape learns to hide what happened. Sometimes green is not hope. Sometimes it is a sheet placed over a body no one wants to look at. Where houses once stood, now there are open spaces. Where children once ran after the truck, the wind now moves through the trees. Where engines, doors, radios, and neighborly conversations once filled the air, there is now a silence so clean it feels suspicious. Times Beach no longer appears on maps as a living town. It exists only in documents, old photographs, testimonies, and the memory of those who had to leave, and in every person who remembers how the dust of an ordinary road became the doorway to a nightmare. The question that remains. The story of Times Beach is not only about contamination. It is about trust. It is about what happens when a community depends on decisions made far from its homes. It is about how easy it is to call something a solution before it is understood. It is about how negligence can walk disguised as savings. It is about how an invisible poison can erase an entire town without making a sound. Because no one saw the disaster coming. It did not arrive with an explosion. It did not appear in one night. It did not fall from the sky. It was sprayed slowly. One street at a time. One drop at a time. One summer at a time. Maybe that is the most terrifying part. Times Beach did not die all at once. It grew sick in silence while children played, while parents worked, while neighbors talked on porches, while daily life kept pretending the ground did not hold a sentence. Times Beach was a small town, but its shadow is enormous. It reminds us that some mistakes do not stay in the past. They seep, they persist, they wait. It reminds us that the invisible can be more dangerous than the obvious. That the word safe can become a mask. That a town can be erased not by nature but by human negligence. And above all, it reminds us of something we should never forget. Sometimes, the dust we try to silence was only hiding a smaller danger. Because sometimes the cure is 1,000 times more lethal than the disease. This was Echoes of Shadows. And although Times Beach no longer exists on the map, its silent poison still speaks from beneath the earth.